I've never been at the Berlin Film Festival, which is obviously world-renowned for being a celebration of a quality film. So to be here with something like this, the first sort of comic book movie to come here, is a great honor.
The weeks leading up to Logan's release, including its ceremonious reception at the Berlin Film Festival, was full of praise for the new ideas it would bring to comic book adaptations, but not even its premise is original. There's a long cinematic tradition of emotionally distant men being forced to look after a young person, even if they're capable of managing on their own. And in setting their mysterious and often violent pasts aside, the hero accepts a parental responsibility that makes up for the sins and failures that once defined them. The setup is so well known that it only appears new when placed in a new medium, and even there it's becoming quite familiar. And considering that Logan is the 10th installment in the X-Men series, there should be nothing left for this movie to say about mutants. But there is. Entering the movie business altered Marvel's sprawling universe. Different studios own the rights to certain characters, and there's little incentive to provide the competition with new material, unless they're open to a little collaboration.
That's not a hug, I'm just grabbing the door for you. We're not there yet.
This keeps certain books from interacting with others. But there was a time you could pick up a Marvel comic, say one about a retired superhero who becomes a private detective, turn a few pages, and find a seemingly unrelated passage about mutants, and the humans that fear or defend them. Chris Claremont, arguably the most influential X-Men writer, spent time in Israel, living and working on a kibbutz. What he learned from Holocaust survivors and saw as conflicts escalated informed his decision to make mutants the other. This meant drafting diverse teams, oftentimes with members from different countries, and placing them in the middle of social and political fights. Even those who know the X-Men through its animated adaptations are familiar with Claremont's ideas.
What we have accomplished tonight is a warning to all mutants of what the future holds for them. Tomorrow belongs to humanity, a humanity cleansed of this foul mutant disease. Here's one of them.
Why do you hate us? What did we ever do to you?
You were born.
What Claremont did for the X-Men is what the 2000 adaptation set out to continue, and that movie did so by stating clearly that the X-Men are not superheroes. They're something else entirely. X-Men opens to Nazi soldiers separating a young Eric from his parents, causing his mutation to manifest. Then, similar genetic abnormalities are shown to have endured time and reached other continents. And finally, the first heroic act on display is Jean Grey testifying before Congress as Senator Robert Kelly makes a push for the Mutant Registration Act.
Mutants who've come forward and revealed themselves publicly have been met with fear, hostility, even violence. It is because of that ever-present hostility that I am urging the Senate to vote against mutant registration.
What is it the mutant community has to hide, I wonder, that makes them so afraid to identify themselves? I have here a list of names of identified mutants living right here in the United States.
Senator
And there are
Kelly.
even rumors, Miss Gray, of mutants so powerful that they can enter our minds and control our thoughts.
This would provide the framework for the movies that followed. X-Men juxtaposes the militant and diplomatic responses to persecution from governments and society. X2 shows a government willfully subverting the law by spying on its citizens, identifying an entire segment of the population as a threat, and using the military to rendition children. Then, competition arrived. These movies now had to expand their cast, increase their scale, and advertise the next installment in an ever-growing franchise. As spectacle increased, the potential for meaningful storytelling was abandoned. Days of Future Past attempted to pull away from this trend, and in its final moments attempts to convince the audience that it has. But what it tried to say gets buried underneath bombastic action and a large cast. It's something that nearly kept director James Mangold from returning after making The Wolverine.
Is there a part of you that's like, oh my God, so now I've got to go back and do Wolverine? Or do you think like,
yeah,
yay?
there's a, yes, absolutely. You kind of go, oh, that was a real movie. And now I'm kind of plunged back into franchise world. They're not movies generally. They're bloated exercises in 2-hour trailers for another movie they're going to sell you in 2 years. There's so many characters that each character gets an arc of about 6.5 minutes at best. And I'm not exaggerating. I mean, you take 120 minutes, you take 45 of it for action. What are you left with? Divide it by 6 characters. You have the character arc of Elmer Fudd in a Warner Brothers cartoon. So that formula is empty to me.
In order to avoid this trend, Mangold placed the weight of the narrative on a small cast and set the story in the future. Logan's future, and our present, is informed by a sense of disposability. In 2029, Alkali Transigen, built on the science and personnel that ran the Weapon X program, is a corporation that's dominated most of North America. Through its subsidiary, Canewood, corn syrup has been modified to render the X gene impotent in the global population, preventing new mutants from being born, significantly reducing their numbers. Humans are also under threat. Canewood has purchased much of the American heartland to cultivate corn, dwarfing humble rural lives with hulking machines that work late into the night, subjecting struggling farmers to the intimidation tactics of its employees. Canewood is so invested in its operations that its automated system literally runs disposable people off the road, as if to say mutants and those who would sympathize with them are standing in the way of progress. Mangold relies on 4 immigrant mutants to make this point. Logan lives with a pair of English mutants on the southern border, one of whom helps him escort his Mexican daughter past the dangers in the US to the safety of his native Canada. For Professor Charles Xavier, this is the darkest future possible. Since 1962, Xavier has opened his home to young mutants, become their mentor, therapist, friend, and surrogate father.
This is yours. No, it's ours.
The X-Men are a family he hoped would shape public opinion on mutants, while knowing that ignorance could win and jeopardize their safety and freedom for generations. Still, he insisted that mutants would always have a place in humanity's future.
This is a moment to repeat the mistakes of the past, or to work together for a better future. We're here to stay, Mr. President.
Mangold challenged that idealism by asking, what if Xavier's partly to blame for all that's gone wrong? While his brain is referred to as a weapon of mass destruction, Dr. Rice and Donald Pierce might as well be speaking about Xavier's romantic ideals and how they failed to prepare his students for the world beyond the walls of his mansion. That realization makes the Munson family sequence all the more upsetting. Everything Xavier had asked of his students over the years was to build a society where moments like these were common.
Careful, you're speaking to a man who ran a school for a lot of years, right, Charles? Really?
Well, yes, there was a kind of special needs school. He was there too.
Oh yeah, no, I got kicked out a few times.
I wish I could say you were a good pupil, but the words would choke me.
But there are forces working against such a future all the time. Nearly every group of mutants places young people around a parental figure that promises to guide them through confusion and fear. Logan has been both the frustrating student and unconventional teacher, making him ideal to play the adult child of a dying parent and a reluctant father. It shows us what it's like to live under Xavier's ideals and what happens when Logan attempts to impart that wisdom to another generation. As Mangold says about Joey, the small boy who grows attached to the gunslinger in Shane, a movie so influential it's referenced throughout Logan, we come to understand the darker, complicated shadows and mysteries that await mutant children in adulthood. At 197 years of age, Logan knows the quality of life his daughter can expect. Ignoring the direct threat from Donald Pierce and his Reavers, Laura would still face just as many years as the other, led to the dehumanizing impulses of a hostile society. And though he may want to, there's nothing Logan can do to change that. As a mutant, Logan had few prospects in life. He lived transiently, kept others at a distance, and sought out ways to exercise his anger at the world. Having no recognizable space in society made him perfect for the Weapon X program. The government Logan had once served isolated, dehumanized, and utilized him for their own purposes. And with this disposability made clear, Logan's violent tendencies were justified. Dr. Rice maintains this impression of mutants, that they're dangerous, subhuman. If they can be controlled as a labor force or used as a commodity, they have some purpose. If not, they're a threat. This is personified in X-24, a solution Dr. Rice turned to when it became clear that mutant children weren't the monsters he had hoped. But it also serves as a reminder of the man Logan was and who he could have been. Mangold's use of comic books have a practical explanation. For Laura and her friends, they're a source of inspiration.
Oh yeah, Charles, we got ourselves an X-Men fan.
Mutant children are ostracized, displaced, and uncertain about their immediate future. Reading exaggerated exploits of the X-Men provides them a model to follow as they make their way through a world that hates them. Fantasy, however, is hard to live up to. Laura becomes disappointed to learn who Logan is and that he is all they have to learn from.
Shut the fuck up!
All of these elements come together at the Canadian border. By protecting the children just long enough for them to unite, they are more capable to deal with the threats made against their existence. Xavier's dream for his students is given another chance. But it's Laura and Logan's reunion that's the most gratifying. He's willing to sacrifice himself for Laura's protection, only to discover that he can't outslash X-24. This side of himself is still with him, and it reminds Logan that he doesn't deserve the future Xavier envisioned. It's only fitting that Laura would be the one to hold on to the adamantium bullet, made from the same metal that's grafted on their bones. From her hand, that poison is released, eliminating Logan's shadow, so he can better see what he contributed to the future. A futuristic, neo-Western family drama wound up being the most loyal X-Men adaptation in the series, and Mangold pulled it off by sidestepping any association to the bloated business of superheroes. Why Logan deserves its critical praise, and why I'm thinking about it more than 8 months after its release, is how well the hopes and anxieties of one generation are passed on to the next. Mangold and his creative team shared specific views about the social and political fights surrounding marginalized people, how we all contribute to the future we're inching towards, and use this fictional other to give representation to its real-world counterparts.
And I think it is the same for all artists, no matter which field they work in, that you present your art as an influenced person by those times. You cannot escape from it. We did not set out to make a political movie. And yet there are references and echoes in this movie that could not have been anticipated but exist today.
I think it's important that we not be part of the problem. And what I mean by that is that we not be making movies that help people sleep through their lives.
Leaving behind the barren deserts of Mexico, running through the ruins of America, and reaching the lush greenery of Canada charts out Logan's 17-year epic, bringing him to a place where the cruelty he'd been subjected to could be rejected, so he could finally accept that which he longed for most.
This is what it feels like. You know, Logan, this is what life looks like. A home, people who love each other, a safe place. You should take a moment and feel it.